Hi, my name's Andy Hodgson, and I want to take this next minute to chat to you a little bit about the Emerging Leaders Program and why you should consider it for yourself, for the leaders you're developing, or as a partnership for your church or ministry organisation. You know, before sending out the 12, Jesus says, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." We still believe this to be the case today, and that's why we want to equip and train disciple-making and movement-building leaders to be sent, so that we may see disciple-making movements launched in all church and community contexts across Australia. The Emerging Leaders Program is an opportunity for leaders to establish their leadership now and to impact their future ministry. Our heart is to equip, train, and launch generations of leaders who think movements like Jesus did, who live authentically as disciple makers in their everyday life, and who are known to be kingdom-minded. We explore the life of Jesus as our model of leadership and lifestyle. By journeying through Jesus' life chronologically, we discover his priorities, his methods, his mission, and his model. And then we work hard to help to implement these priorities in your personal lives and ministries that you lead through coaching, mentoring, and practical application. In addition to this, we recognise the importance of accredited biblical and theological studies. So through our partnership with ACOM, students engage in academic study anywhere from a higher ed diploma through to a master's. We also further explore specific leadership skills for today, and we do this all as a learning cohort. And so we would like you to consider being a part of any of our programs so that you can be equipped, trained, and launched, so together we can see disciple-making movements through your life and leadership.
Today's topic is about failure. And it's always like when I got Andy's email, I was just like, I don't know if he thinks maybe I'm a professional at failing, or if it's more the well bit, the failing well, that I'm going to choose to believe the best. That he thinks when I do fail, I do it so spectacularly. It's brilliant. In fact, when quite a while ago at the church that I was previously pastoring, I was preaching on the topic of failing, and I used the illustration of a time when I was on a cruise. Okay, go picture this. I was on a cruise with a group of girlfriends. That was back before like they had COVID cruises. Like it was just a regular cruise, and they had this option that you could join. You could participate in the nightly shows that they put on in their theatre room. And so one night they had like a cowboy themed thing, and so you could learn to boot scoot and then be part of the presentation of boot scooting at the night's performance. Like this was amazing, right? So my three girlfriends and I decided, of course we're going to be in the boot scooting thing. Like why not? And because we're so amazing at it, they put us right in the front row of the performance because, like it turns out we're actually quite natural boot scooters. But in the middle of the performance, I just lost my focus, which is not uncommon for me, and kind of lost my way. But just worked out that if you kind of do a little bit of a tip of your hat and a bit of a do like that, like you can just make it look like that's what you're meant to do. And I turned to my girlfriends because they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, just kept smiling, just kept dancing. And I said to them, it's all about the recovery. Like it's just all about it doesn't matter if you mess up, it's how you recover. And I just like yeehaw it, and we kept moving on. And so that phrase though, it's all about the recovery, particularly after I preached that story, became actually a bit of a mantra for us in our team about how we fail well. It's not about the failure, it's all about the recovery is how we kept doing it. Just to start us off with a little inspo on some failure, on the topic of failure, when those motivational posters that used to be all the rage. I went looking for the series that's called the demotivational posters, which is, everyone needs a little bit of demotivation in their life. So can you see that? Am I sharing my right screen? I just need to always check that in case you're looking at my emails or something right now. Failure coming to a face near you. Perfect. This is a bit of a generational one, this one. Failure, it takes a lot of work sometimes. Look at that. That is the final guess, and it was wrong. If you know Minesweeper, if you know, right? Failure, it's priceless. Beautiful. That's unfortunate. Epic failure. Sometimes there's no excuse. Failed, you have. We can't spell failure without you. How's it going? Failure can be painful. Yes, it can. Yes, indeed. And here's a topical one. Failure, otherwise known in the Olympics as silver. That's a little bit sad. Come on, like as if haven't won a little bit to get silver. But yes, it's a little bit true. So today we are talking about the topic of failing well, and I'm kind of thinking in terms of our time, we're going to spend a fair bit of time in breakout rooms because your voices and hearing from each other and engaging on it is going to be much more useful than listening to my voice. But for the first sort of part of our time together, I want to look at a little bit more the sort of mechanics of failure, because when we're talking about being in leadership, like we understand that failure happens at all sorts of levels in all sorts of places all the time. But if we're thinking about leaders who are on the missional edge, who are ready to lead new things, who are ready to explore new options of mission and ministry and life, that we're actually going to be in a place where failure is almost necessary for us to find our way into new spaces and to innovate and to find creative and unique ways of engaging people with the gospel. And so when we're thinking about this, like I think we were running kind of two tracks all the time, is how do we deal with failure ourselves? How do we prevent unnecessary failure? How do we recover from failure? But also how do we lead organizationally, lead others in under this heading or under this kind of idea of considering what failure looks like? Because what does it look like to lead a culture where failure is dealt with appropriately? That there's a culture that encourages experimentation, but it doesn't make unnecessary risks or set people up to fail. So we're kind of running those two tracks all the time. Like, what does this look like for me personally, but how am I leading in this space as well? And in terms of just the flow of our time together, I wanted to start looking at sort of the mechanics of failure, if you like, some of the science around it, some of the ways we can consider it. And then probably as we move towards the latter part of our time together, it'll be more about what we do around personal failure, so character and moral failure, which is obviously one of the ways that we experience that in our context. So first up, looking at I've found this a really interesting way to kind of consider what failure might look like, and that is to say that there's three types of failure. And the first is failure that's preventable. So it's failure that happens in predictable circumstances or predictable operations, and it's bad failure, right? Because it should have been, it's possible for it to be successful. So if it's not successful, something's gone wrong, right? It's because these are predictable circumstances. The system is set up to win. So if we don't win in this situation, something has gone wrong, and it's normally human error, right? Someone has done something wrong. It's easy in this type of failure to identify what's happened and why, because predictable systems deal with failure well, because they're like somewhere on this production line, where is the issue, and it's more easy to accurately pinpoint it. Then you have unavoidable failures in more complex systems. So where the work is a little bit more uncertain, things are a little bit more ambiguous or changing, or there's combinations of events and things that intersect that have never happened before, where there's things that you can't predict, or you can't have a system exactly for that combination of events or outcomes. So an example of this is triaging patients in an emergency room at the hospital, right? Like you you have someone who comes in with this, presenting with these conditions, and this has happened, but this hasn't happened, and like, there's a whole list of things. And if you've ever been to the triage at an emergency room, like the questions they ask you are trying to narrow that down all the time. Are you this? Are you allergic to that? Have you been near this? Have you tried one of those? And they're trying to diagnose it, because there's so many things that could have gone wrong to make you be in the emergency room right now. And so when in these more complex systems, failure has to be identified really quickly with small failures to keep big things happening. Again, if you think about it from a medical perspective, often if a failing has happened in a medical context where a patient has died, or something has happened that shouldn't have happened for a patient, it's because little things weren't detected. We didn't realize that they were allergic to the needle tape or whatever thing that you used, or we didn't realize that they had Panadol before we gave them this medicine, whatever it is. Like, there's little mistakes that happen that will actually cause more significant failures. And then the third one is what we call intelligent failures at the frontier. So these are failures that we almost intended to make because we're out in a new space. We're at the edge of, no one's been here before. We don't have precedent. We don't have systems in place or protocol in place to manage this. We don't know what questions to ask yet. We're kind of working this out as we go. So they're good failures because they provide us with new knowledge. They provide us with opportunity for growth and to stretch into new places. And, we would describe that as being more on the cutting edge. And in this kind of failure, like, we're talking about places where experimentation is necessary, where we're looking for innovation. Organizationally, we define innovation as change that adds value. So you're trying to, not new things for new sake, but you're actually doing things to try and add value, or to shape something unique, or to go somewhere we haven't been before. And so there's this idea of trial and error is actually built in to the expectations of this. So there's three types: preventable, unavoidable, and intelligent. But the challenge, I think, for us is when we're looking at failure that's taking place, whatever context we're in, it's about being able to accurately identify which of these contexts we're in. Was this a preventable failure, or was this an unavoidable one? Because we're kind of in that slightly unknown space, or is this a smart failure? We've done it. And I think to run this leadership track alongside it, communicating which of these we're in. It's okay, that was an unavoidable mistake because we have never had this combination of events before, or we're like someone who's leading a hospital emergency room is giving permission for people to be asking questions, experimenting, and recognizing that things could go wrong. And so there's a different culture. But if you were the manager of a production line in a factory, you don't get to say, it's all right, however this works is fine, like, just have a go and see. Like, there's systems here like that need to be followed, there's protocol that needs to be followed, and so there's not the same space for experimentation. And obviously when we talk about these more intelligent frontier type environments, there's a lot more permission giving in that. When we talk about startup mentality and entrepreneurial attitude, one of the phrases that gets bandied around is, the faster we fail, the faster we succeed. So it's like fail quickly and recover quickly, because that's how we keep moving forward. Well, that's a great model, great language, great culture to set in frontier environments. But as I said, that you don't say that in a production line. You don't even say that in a hospital room. Just fail quickly, like, just stuff it up and go for it. There's a different language that we have. So what I want you to do is to go into your breakout rooms and have a think about preventable, unavoidable, intelligent. When you consider the context that you work and lead in, like, how does this translate? So this is obviously sort of a corporate, marketplace kind of model of thinking about failure, but how does it translate then into the ministry space or into the missional space when we're talking, like, where is the area for preventable failures? Like, what's our responsibility from a leadership perspective to be setting up operations and predictable things that people can act predictably and consistently, and so that sort of system's in place. Where is the place where there's unavoidable failure where the systems are more complex, where things are intersecting and we're being more adaptive and responsive. And then where's the space for these intelligent sort of on the frontier type failures? So have let's say 10 minutes, Andy, in their rooms to just have a think about how does this framework apply to the context that you minister and lead in. So as we talk about this whole idea of these three types of failure, particularly when we talk about this intelligent, unpredictable frontier type failure, is often what we see come to the fore is the fear of failure then becoming an obstacle to growth, to development, to exploring new spaces, is because depending on our attitude around failure, depending on our experience with failure, depending the narrative or the story that's been told to us about failure, it can actually elicit quite a fear response in us, or there can be a bit of an obstacle to failure. And so some people, you could just throw the word perfectionist at it, and that kind of gives you a little bit of a framework where people who are just so determined that everything should be right, that it prevents them from exploring new spaces or it limits them in some ways. But this whole idea that if our attitude to failure is that all failure is bad, or where our humility, pride becomes an issue because we're concerned about how failure reflects on us personally, or what it looks like to feel the expectations of other people around failure. So anything that sort of rises this, it gives rise to fear of failure in us is obviously going to then shut down our capacity to be in that intelligent space, of trying new things, of even releasing other people into unknown spaces, or spaces that are different than where we've been, or what our capacity or passion or experience lends us to. So we're going to look at this notion of how the fear of failure might manifest. And I think part of the challenge as we go through this list is identifying perhaps for you personally how fear of failure might manifest itself, because you might not actually say that you're afraid of it, but then you might identify with some of these behaviors. But also then recognizing in an organization, how do these fear responses, these fear actions, if you like, kind of impact onto a team dynamic or an ability for a ministry or mission to move forward. So let me just quickly flick through them, and then you can unpack them for yourself. So the first way fear of failure can manifest is debilitating procrastination. This is, I have to confess, this is me. Like, if I don't think I can do something well, I'll put off doing it for a really long time. Like, if I'm worried that it's not going to go well, I'd rather not start and prove that it didn't go well. So I'm sort of pushing it away as far as I can. So if we're worried about making mistakes, we can then avoid even, delay the start of whatever this thing is to be, or you start avoiding things. But what happens is that we can really jeopardize personal growth or professional or corporate or team goals if we're not actually pushing past this hesitancy we have to do something in case it fails. Focusing on catastrophic outcomes. If it's not you, someone who does this, which is they're like all for the let's talk about, but they can tell you absolutely everything that could possibly go wrong, and normally it ends with "and we could die." Right? So there's this list of all the reasons why we shouldn't try this. It's the fear factor makes us oversize the worst possible outcomes, and it takes a whole lot of attention and energy from an individual, but also from a team. If you're having to deal with, can we just go through like the 73 things that could go wrong? Like that's an energy drainer in a team dynamic, or a ministry or a program's energy to be focusing on everything that could go wrong. From a personal perspective, if we have this attitude that failure is inexcusable, then there's no room for error. it becomes a really personal thing, that we feel the deep guilt or shame around failure, may even punish ourselves for that, but definitely have that really negative self-talk, like, this is going to fail, it's failed before, of course you got it wrong, you always get things wrong. It's that sort of negative self-talk that can come in. It can manifest in withholding work and ideas from other people. So this could be in that more personal sense of, I don't want you to see this until I'm confident that it's a success. So I'm not going to tell you where I'm up to. I'm not going to show you it in stages. I'm just going to give you this big presentation at the end. I want to impress you, so I'm not going to share until I think I can impress you. But by doing that, obviously, not only do we sort of slow down the process of other people even having confidence in us that it's going to be completed, but that we miss out on the input of other people to the development of the idea or the opportunity, miss out on the encouragement of other people. It also prevents other people from participating and contributing to what it is that we're developing if we're withholding until it's complete. We create unreasonable goals. So essentially, if you've got a fear of failure and that's sort of shaping how you think and perceive and expect, it's just constant disappointment, right? If you can't bear to fail, that means you need to succeed at the very first try, or and as I say, that'll stop people from trying anything new unless they're convinced that they can achieve it. But it just creates really unreasonable goals and expectations. We get crushed by setbacks. So if we have a fear of failure, then any kind of failure is then going to be, feel massive in us in terms of the disappointment or the confusion or the anger, the emotions that we experience, and then can actually experience quite a deep wounding, that of shame, or that it's attached to that, which can take a long time to recover and can feed again fear of failing next time, right? So because the last time I did this, it really hurt. I got it really wrong. It was highly embarrassing or negative in some way. We don't deal with little setbacks. And then believing fear of failure is needed as a motivation. So it's almost like if we fear failure, then we can sort of flick that around like that, so that we don't get complacent, or so that we don't settle for mediocre, where we want to threaten failure as the way to motivate us to not fail. Like, this could go really wrong if you don't all do the right thing. Remember last time someone did this, it sucked. So we're gonna, you got to work harder. It's this motivating thing around fear, but the opposite is actually true. Fear isn't a great motivator. Because when we're under threat, the biology and physiology of what that does to our brains, and it basically shuts us down. And so we're less creative, we're less adaptable, we're less flexible, and so we're more likely to make a mistake. So we're kind of it's a counterintuitive response that we think if we fear failure, it will protect us from it, but it probably increases the likelihood of it. So curiosity and intrigue is sort of the mindset that we're trying to nurture, which is, what went wrong, how can I fix it? And so that activates our brain in a way that actually increases our capacity for innovation and lateral thinking and reasoning that's going to increase our chance of success. So make sure you've got those, 7 things written down, because we're going to go into your groups to have a chat about that. Essentially looking at maybe, how that as matter, again, which one of these sort of stands out for you? As I said, the procrastination thing is a massive one for me, but what does that look like in your own context or your own life, that when you have a fear of failure, how does it manifest for you? And if you get, make sure everyone shares into that, and if you get time to sort of start unpacking, what the flip side of that is, or how you're sort of speaking to that in a more developmental or positive kind of way, do that. But you've got 10 minutes again, so have a little chatty chat about that. Nominate your group sharer, and be letting them know what you're happy to be shared back to the group, but would love to hear your thoughts on how fear of failure manifests for you. What I want us to have a think about now, in context then to and just even what Belinda just talked about there, what does it look like then to when we're working in team dynamics, when we're working in an organization, when even in a family, and in the spaces that we move around creating healthy failure culture. Like how do we deal with it? What do we call it? What do we do when it happens? How do we respond to it? And how do we review it when it happens? All those sorts of things is thinking a bit more intentionally about how we shape a culture that has a healthy way of handling failure, or has a healthy response and to failure. So there's 3 points here I want to share. And the first is that a healthy failure culture is good at detecting failure. Because sometimes failure is actually hidden. Like things go wrong and no one says anything about where that, someone doesn't do what they said they were going to do, but no one gets told that it didn't happen. And, it can sometimes actually not be evident where the failure or failures are taking place. I mean, going back to the hospital triage moment, like that there can be steps along the way where someone has not done the right thing, and it can be hard to identify which person has missed there's their spot there, or where the failing has taken place. But when we're talking about healthy culture, it's a culture that quickly identifies failure and encourages the disclosure of that straight away. Like, where, oh, whoops, I didn't do what I said I was going to do, or that was me. Can we fix it? What do I need to do? I didn't send what I needed to send. I haven't paid what I need to pay. I just said something that was wrong. Like I gave an incorrect instruction. Whatever it is, like creating a culture where that encourages that being identified and disclosed really quickly, because delaying naming failure can be really costly. And I think part of that is, if we have this sense that all failures are blameworthy, so I mean, it could be that the failure is that the coffee cart that I ordered hasn't shown up. But for me to come and say, hey, the coffee cart hasn't shown up, that may not be my fault, right? Like they may be late, that it may be their responsibility. But if there's a sense that someone like we have to take blame for failure that takes place, is going to diminish my likelihood of actually disclosing that. I'm going to just kind of keep distracting you until the coffee cart does show up, and not have to acknowledge that there was failure there, because I'm feeling like I'm going to be the one who bears the brunt of that, even if it's not me. So this is what we're talking about when we say a culture. How does the culture deal with failure that makes it quick and easy to detect it, so that we get the opportunity to correct it and learn from it really, really fast. Talking about psychological safety, where the rewards of learning from the failure are higher than the negative impact of disclosing the failure. That when I come and say, I've done this wrong, how that gets treated by you and by the team rewards me for disclosing that in a way that then, thanks Kim for pointing that out, because now we can work this out, and now we can do this, or we can learn from that, or thanks Kim for telling us that, because we wouldn't have known that was the problem unless you had told us. And so there's a reward for me sharing that has more significance and more weight than any shame or guilt or disappointment that I might feel for the failure, or being any part that I have in that. So a healthy culture detects and then it analyzes it. So this is the process of actually gleaning wisdom and learning from the failure that's been identified. Our natural tendency is to avoid it, even for others. Oh no, that's okay. You're fine. Don't worry about it. No, don't worry about it. Don't. We'll fix it. We'll move on. Don't worry about it. Where we quickly want to get to a place of peace and relational okayness, and we can actually avoid the analysis that would make that a bit more useful to us, and maybe make it more likely that it's not going to happen again. And often it takes time that we don't see the value in it. Like, we don't have time to process this. We don't have time to deal with this. Let's just move on. But often without giving it that time, you're actually just borrowing time from later, where it's going to be a bigger problem or it's going to repeat itself. So, valuing it enough to front end the time investment to, prioritize processing it rather than prioritizing decisiveness and quick movement. To keep going, don't worry about it, can't care, let's pause. And the psychology of it is this fundamental attribution error, which is basically we are all wired to blame everything else but ourselves when things go wrong, right? That's our bias, is to look for cause outside of us rather than just to default to owning it ourselves. So again, this analysis causes us to say, okay, yep, they did that and they did that and this happened that was out of your control, but what part did you have to play in this? What responsibility can you take, or at least what learning can you get from it? There was a study that I read that was about a really successful group of hospitals in America that had this process of responding to failure, and therefore had lower failure outcomes than other hospital regions around them. But what they had in place that they identified as the key factor for this is routine investigation of any time medical personnel deviated from protocol. So if you're meant to do bandage it this way, but I bandage it this way, even if it was a successful outcome, you had to report your deviation and why. And so their process was to always learn from every deviation, not just from the ones that killed the patient. Right? So the processes were in place that we always review this. We always go back and because we're honoring the fact that in a moment, it could be right to deviate from normal protocol because of, as we talked about, the confluence of all these different factors that mean normally we would do this, but we chose to do this. Normally this happens, but that wasn't available to us, so we did this. But even they investigate it when it works, not just when it goes wrong, so that they've got this system in place so that when it does go wrong, it's a much easier process to keep. So there's not this assumption that a deviation is wrong. They've got a story that says deviation is necessary sometimes. And so the question is, was deviation the right choice in this moment? So it changes the way that gets analysed. And then a healthy culture of failure really promotes experimentation. It promotes discovery. It promotes people feeling confident to have a go. It promotes a sense of everyone's contributions being valued, that there's going to be a way that they get to be part of a process. Because perfection is the enemy of discovery. Like if we just want to do it right, we're not necessarily going to work out how to do it best, because we're going to be sort of limited by that. So promoting exploration and experimentation means that we might discover the best way, not just do it the right way or the way that we know to do it already. And again, this is sort of the way people study failure and study mistake making is this idea of designing successful failures, which is this sense that we're seeking to, because normally our default again is seeking to prove what could go wrong if something went wrong, rather than proving that in perfect conditions everything could go right. So sorry, that was confusing. Let me say it again. So we tend to, like when we review something or when we're putting a process in place, we say if you follow all of these things, it will work out perfectly. So let's test that. If I follow these steps, did it work out perfectly? Yes. Let's follow it again in this condition. Yes, it worked out perfectly, rather than proving that if something goes wrong, what could go wrong if something goes wrong, and what could be the alternate pathways out of it if it goes wrong. So it's designing a process of reviewing and preparing and, experimenting that actually is factoring in that things will probably go wrong, but is this system robust enough to handle when things go wrong? Like that's the question. So designing successful failures is what they call that. I love this quote from Adam Grant, and I also love Adam Grant. If you are interested in any way in organizational psychology, and which I am, it makes me get very excited. He's your guy. But he says, when you punish failure, people are quick to deny it. They strive to convince others and themselves that they haven't failed. When you normalize failure as part of growth, people are quick to recognize it, and they'll strive to learn from it and rectify it. And this is a description of culture that has set up healthy responses and attitudes to failure that mean there's a normalizing of failure that allows people to feel safe to identify when they have failed, and also to have expectation that their failure is going to be handled appropriately, if that makes sense. So going back to your groups, and thinking about those, what it looks like to create a culture of healthy attitudes or expectations around failure. So detect, analyze, promote. How, maybe even to reflect in the context that I'm in, are we healthy in this way? Like, and if we're not, which is the step that we're missing, or which is the thing that we're good at, or which is, the part that we could improve. Do a little bit of diagnosis around what a healthy culture of failure would look like. You've got 8 minutes this time. Obviously this sort of moves into a different place in terms of how we analyze it. But one of the things I just thought for us to explore a little bit was just a quick list of things to help us to prevent personal failure rather than sort of focusing on the recovery side of it. Because I think, as I said, recovery is very different from personal or moral failure than it is from practical failure, because it's more about who we are rather than what we do. And so it has a lot more nuance to it, a lot more gentleness required, but also not often as quick and easy to, I forgot to buy the coffee as I unintentionally embezzled finances. It's a slightly different kind of response and a different restoration process. But let me just share my screen to just reflect on a few, nothing new here for you, I'm sure, but just to bring them to the fore of some of the processes, I guess, of preventing personal failure. One is around staying close. So that's staying close to people, having community, relationship. A great quote I saw from Carey Nieuwhof is that solitude is a gift from God. Isolation is a tool of the enemy. There's a distinction between being alone and being alone. So keeping relationally close to people allows a degree of accountability. It allows people to speak into your life, to see where you're struggling or where areas of weakness or challenge might be, and to help you navigate those and respond appropriately. And then of course there's our spiritual practices. Again, probably goes without saying, but it's always worth saying, isn't it? Because everyone can keep stepping up in this area in terms of confession and worship and giving and generosity and being mission minded and justice oriented, and anything that develops our intimacy with God, prayer, Bible reading, devotional life, like these sorts of practices. The closer we are with God, the more examined we will be in terms of identifying flaws in our character and where our temptations might be greatest. I think counting the cost, that's just that sense of mindfulness of the consequence of bad behavior. Now, when we say, moral failure, like I fail on the daily as a parent in this department where my attitude just sucks. Like I don't do anything wrong. Like I don't hit her. I don't starve her, or there's nothing that I can be arrested for. There's no action that comes out of that's punishable in any way, but the attitude of that is a failure. Like the way that I would speak to her, or just the attitude I would demonstrate to her, lack of patience. That's a moral failing, right? It's obviously at a smaller scale than some of the other things you might be thinking, but I think this idea of counting the cost is just recognizing that every time we deviate, we move away from God's intended best for us in our behavior, our attitudes, our speech, and our action, that there's a consequence, not just to ourselves, but to other people. People are watching us, people are impacted by that. And when we think of it from a leadership perspective, character is caught. What we model and what we demonstrate in terms of character is what other people are picking up and emulating or replicating in their life, even if they don't mean to. Like it just is caught by them being around us. Staying open, this is the act of being just constantly ready to learn and grow and recognize that we always have space for this. It requires submission to other people to let them teach us, and to let them speak into our lives. It requires humility to know that you're not all there. You haven't arrived. There's still more to learn and more to understand. And I think the constant drive, I think, for leaders, and it kind of goes back to this isolation thing, because we often talk about leadership being a lonely sort of place because we can end up sort of separated from other people. But I reckon it's a personal challenge to keep putting ourselves in places where we're not the smartest person in the room, where we're not the most experienced, we're not the most knowledgeable. And in some ways and sometimes that can be actually like hard to do. I mean, that sounds kind of a bit arrogant, but it can be hard to find places where if you are a youth leader, for example, your youth ministry and your youth leaders are unlikely to be the people who are the smartest. You will be the smartest in that room, or the most experienced, or the something, the most powerful in that room. So you have to be intentional about seeking out other places where that's not the case, so that you get that sense of staying open, staying humble, staying ready to learn and grow. And then healthy. This is the one that really annoys me, because it's just because there's chocolate, and there's things that just really come and get. The enemy is strong in this space. But, it's staying healthy physically in your body. As I say, we say this all the time, but there is no substitute for it. Joe Saxton says your leadership, what is it? Your body is where your leadership walks around, and so your leadership has no traction if your body isn't carrying it in a healthy way. Like if your body fails you, your leadership disappears. You know what I mean? So you have to have a healthy body to keep strengthening and fueling your leadership, or allowing your leadership to happen. So I think staying healthy too is recognizing your own limits, staying within them. The risk of burnout or stress, where does that sit for you? But also realizing that if you are under stress or near or in burnout, you're more vulnerable to make really bad choices about how you self-care, what you think is okay. And what we see a lot in sort of high-level moral failure in leadership often comes back to this, where people are dry and empty and on the edge of their own capacity, and so they stop being smart. So a quick chat in your rooms. This is like 5 minutes, so it's a whip around. What does it look like in your world to prevent personal failure?